success. Be careful how you treat an empath, because the moment they stop fighting for you, stop explaining themselves, and stop giving you chances, success. That's the moment you realize what you've lost. And by then, it may already be too late. What if the kindest person in your life is also the strongest? Success. What if the person who keeps forgiving, understanding, and supporting everyone around them is silently reaching their breaking point? Success. Most people think empaths are weak because they are compassionate. They mistake patience for vulnerability and kindness for dependence. Success. But what happens when an empath finally decides they've had enough? In today's speech, success. You'll discover why hurting an empath can become one of the biggest regrets a person ever experiences. You'll learn the hidden strength behind empathy, success, the psychological shift that occurs when an empath walks away, and why their silence can be far more powerful than their words. Stay until the end, success, because the final lesson reveals the one thing people realize only after an empath is gone forever, and it changes everything.
One of the biggest mistakes people make about empaths is assuming that kindness is weakness. They see someone who listens patiently, forgives repeatedly, and cares deeply about others, and they automatically assume that person lacks strength. They believe an empath is easy to manipulate, easy to control, and easy to take for granted. But that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, what most people fail to understand is that empathy requires a level of emotional strength that many people never develop. It takes strength to remain calm when others are angry. It takes strength to continue showing compassion in a world that often rewards selfishness. And it takes incredible strength to keep your heart open after experiencing disappointment, betrayal, and pain. Yet because empaths rarely advertise their strength, people often overlook it completely. Think about it for a moment. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. The person who wins every argument is not always the most powerful. Sometimes the strongest individual is the one who chooses understanding over conflict, patience over revenge, and growth over bitterness. Empaths possess a unique ability to see beyond people's actions and recognize the emotions driving those actions. When someone lashes out, an empath often notices the hurt beneath the anger. When someone becomes distant, an empath senses the fear beneath the silence. This ability allows them to respond with compassion when others might respond with judgment. Unfortunately, many people mistake this compassion for vulnerability. Because empaths tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, they often become targets for those who seek to exploit kindness. Some people start believing that the empath will always be there no matter how poorly they are treated. They assume apologies are unnecessary because forgiveness seems guaranteed. They begin pushing boundaries, making demands, and expecting understanding without offering the same respect in return. What they don't realize is that every act of disrespect is being noticed. Every broken promise leaves an impression. Every selfish decision creates distance. Empaths may not react immediately, but that doesn't mean they are unaware. In fact, they often see far more than they reveal. The reason empaths don't always confront problems right away is because they genuinely want to believe in people. They hope others will grow, improve, and become better versions of themselves. They understand that everyone makes mistakes. They recognize that nobody is perfect. This understanding often leads them to extend grace when others would walk away. But extending grace should never be confused with lacking standards. An empath's patience is not evidence that they accept poor treatment forever. It simply means they are giving someone an opportunity to do better. What makes this misunderstanding so dangerous is that people become comfortable receiving without giving. They enjoy the support, encouragement, loyalty, and emotional investment the empath provides. They appreciate having someone who listens during difficult times. They value having someone who remains present when life becomes challenging. Yet many fail to appreciate the emotional effort behind these actions. They start viewing the empath's care as something ordinary rather than something incredibly rare. And once appreciation disappears, entitlement often takes its place. The truth is that empaths are among the most observant individuals you will ever encounter. They notice shifts in energy, changes in behavior, and inconsistencies in words and actions. They can often sense when someone is being genuine and when someone is merely pretending. But because they prefer harmony over confrontation, they don't always reveal what they know. Instead, they watch, they listen, they evaluate. They give people opportunities to show who they truly are. While others may focus on isolated incidents, empaths tend to look for patterns. They pay attention to repeated behaviors because they understand that patterns reveal character. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume that because an empath remains calm, nothing is wrong. They mistake silence for ignorance. They interpret patience as permission. They believe that because consequences haven't arrived yet, consequences will never arrive at all. What they fail to recognize is that empaths are constantly gathering information. Every interaction teaches them something. Every disappointment clarifies something. Every act of selfishness exposes something. While others think nothing is changing, the empath is slowly reaching conclusions that may eventually alter the entire relationship. An empath's kindness is not a sign that they don't value themselves. In reality, many empaths possess a deep understanding of self-worth. They know what healthy relationships look like. They know what respect feels like. They know the difference between occasional mistakes and consistent disregard. The reason they stay longer than most people is not because they are incapable of leaving. It's because they genuinely hope for transformation. They believe people can learn. They believe people can grow. They believe relationships can improve. But belief alone cannot sustain a connection when effort exists on only one side. As time passes, the gap between what an empath gives and what they receive becomes impossible to ignore. Every unappreciated sacrifice, every overlooked act of kindness, and every moment of emotional imbalance gradually reshapes the way they see the people around them. One of the most remarkable qualities of an empath is their willingness to give people another chance. While most individuals reach a breaking point quickly and decide to walk away, empaths often stay longer, try harder, and believe deeper. They don't immediately judge someone based on a single mistake. They understand that everyone faces struggles, makes poor decisions, and sometimes acts in ways that don't reflect their true character. Because of this understanding, empaths naturally become some of the most forgiving people you will ever meet. But this gift of forgiveness often comes with a hidden cost that few people ever recognize until it's too late. An empath rarely gives up on someone after the first disappointment. Instead of focusing on the mistake itself, they focus on the reason behind it. They ask themselves questions that most people never consider. Maybe that person is dealing with stress. Maybe they're carrying emotional wounds from their past. Maybe they're afraid, confused, or overwhelmed. While others are looking at behavior, empaths are looking at emotions. They try to understand what caused the action rather than simply reacting to the action itself. This perspective allows them to remain compassionate even when they have every reason to be upset. The problem begins when people start expecting endless forgiveness instead of appreciating it. The first chance is often given out of kindness. The second chance is given out of hope. The third chance is given because the empath genuinely wants to see improvement. But after a while, some people stop viewing those chances as gifts and begin seeing them as guarantees. They assume the empath will always understand. They assume the empath will always stay. They assume there will always be another opportunity to make things right. What they don't realize is that every chance they receive is slowly becoming more valuable because there are fewer remaining. Empaths often become trapped between what they feel and what they know. Deep inside, they recognize when someone is taking advantage of their kindness. They notice the repeated excuses. They see the broken promises. They recognize the cycle of disappointment. Yet their compassionate nature encourages them to hold on just a little longer. They remember the good moments. They remember the potential they once saw in the relationship. They remember the person they believe someone could become. This hope keeps them invested long after others would have left. Many people misunderstand this loyalty. They think an empath stays because they are dependent. They think an empath stays because they lack confidence. They think an empath stays because they fear being alone. In reality, most empaths stay because they genuinely care. They see value in people that others overlook. They believe relationships deserve effort. They believe growth is possible. They believe that people can change when given enough support and understanding. This belief is powerful, but it also makes empaths vulnerable to disappointment when their effort is not matched. Imagine having someone in your life who consistently chooses understanding over judgment. Someone who listens to your explanations even after you've made mistakes. Someone who sees your flaws and still chooses to support you. Someone who remains patient when others have already walked away. That kind of person is incredibly rare. Yet, because empaths offer this level of compassion so naturally, people often forget how extraordinary it truly is. They become accustomed to receiving understanding without earning it. They begin assuming that support will always be available regardless of how they behave. What many fail to understand is that every chance an empath gives represents an emotional investment. It requires energy to forgive. It requires strength to trust again. It requires courage to remain open after being hurt. Each time an empath chooses to believe in someone again, they are taking a risk. They are placing faith in the possibility of change. They are hoping that their patience will inspire growth. They are choosing optimism over cynicism. But these choices are not limitless. Even the most compassionate heart has boundaries. The dangerous illusion people create is believing that because an empath forgave them before, they will forgive them forever. This assumption becomes the foundation for repeated mistakes. Apologies become routine rather than meaningful. Promises become words rather than commitments. Respect begins to fade because consequences appear absent. The person receiving endless chances starts feeling secure in the relationship while failing to realize that the foundation beneath them is slowly weakening. Meanwhile, something important is happening inside the empath. Every disappointment is being processed. Every broken promise is being remembered. Every moment of being taken for granted is being added to a growing collection of experiences. The empath may remain calm on the surface, but internally they are learning valuable lessons. They are discovering who truly values them and who simply values what they provide. They are beginning to separate genuine appreciation from convenient dependence. What makes this process so significant is that empaths rarely announce when they are reaching their limit. They don't usually issue dramatic ultimatums. They don't spend all their time threatening to leave. Instead, they quietly observe. They quietly reflect. They quietly evaluate whether the relationship is healthy, balanced, and worth continuing. The person receiving all those extra chances often remains completely unaware that a major shift is taking place. They continue assuming everything is fine because the empath is still present. They mistake presence for satisfaction and patience for permanent acceptance. By the time many people realize how much forgiveness they have consumed, how much understanding they have received, and how many opportunities they have wasted, the empath has already begun seeing the relationship through entirely different eyes. The compassion is still there, but the illusion is fading. The hope that once fueled endless second chances is gradually being replaced by clarity, awareness, and a deeper understanding of what they truly deserve. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about empaths is believing that because they don't immediately react to hurtful behavior, they are unaffected by it. Nothing could be further from the truth. Empaths feel deeply. In many cases, they experience emotions more intensely than the average person. They notice subtle changes in tone, energy, attitude, and behavior that others might completely overlook. When someone they care about acts disrespectfully, breaks trust, ignores their feelings, or takes their kindness for granted, the empath notices. They may not create conflict. They may not raise their voice. They may not demand attention. But the experience leaves a mark that becomes part of a much larger picture. Many people assume that damage only occurs during major betrayals. They think relationships fall apart because of one enormous mistake. But for an empath, the real damage often comes from smaller moments repeated over time. It's the promise that is never kept. It's the message that is ignored. It's the effort that is never appreciated. It's the support that is expected but never returned. These moments may seem insignificant to the person causing them, but to an empath, they reveal something important. They reveal priorities. They reveal values. They reveal how much genuine respect exists within the relationship. The reason these moments matter so much is because empaths invest emotionally in the people they care about. They don't simply show up physically, they show up mentally and emotionally. They remember details, they pay attention to struggles, they celebrate victories. They offer encouragement during difficult times. They often carry emotional weight that nobody else sees. Because they invest so much of themselves into relationships, they naturally expect a basic level of consideration in return. Not perfection, not constant praise. Simply respect, honesty, and effort. When those things are missing repeatedly, something begins to change. At first, the empath may excuse the behavior. They may tell themselves the other person is busy. They may assume stress is affecting their actions. They may continue giving the benefit of the doubt because they genuinely want to preserve the connection. But every time the pattern repeats, another mark is left behind. Another piece of trust weakens. Another layer of emotional safety begins to disappear. The relationship may still look normal from the outside, but internally the foundation is slowly eroding. What makes this process difficult to notice is that empaths rarely keep score in the traditional sense. They are not sitting around counting every mistake. They are not searching for reasons to be offended. In fact, they often try very hard to focus on the positive qualities in people. However, the human mind naturally recognizes patterns, and empaths are exceptionally skilled at seeing patterns. Over time, repeated acts of disrespect stop looking like isolated incidents and start looking like a consistent reflection of someone's character. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume that because the empath has forgiven previous behavior, future behavior won't matter either. They think yesterday's forgiveness automatically guarantees tomorrow's forgiveness. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. An empath may forgive someone while still recognizing that the relationship is becoming unhealthy. They may let go of anger while simultaneously becoming more aware of the reality in front of them. Forgiveness can heal emotional wounds, but it does not erase lessons learned through experience. As months or even years pass, the empath begins carrying a collection of memories. Not memories of isolated mistakes, but memories of repeated patterns. They remember who supported them when they needed help. They remember who disappeared when things became inconvenient. They remember who listened and who dismissed their feelings. They remember who valued their presence and who only valued what they could provide. These observations gradually reshape how they view the people around them. The most surprising part is that the person causing the damage often remains completely unaware. Because the empath stays calm, continues being kind, and avoids unnecessary conflict, everything appears normal on the surface. Conversations continue. Daily routines continue. The relationship appears stable. But beneath that stability, emotional distance is beginning to form. The empath is no longer seeing the relationship through the same hopeful lens. They are beginning to accept realities they once tried to ignore. Every act of disrespect sends a message, whether intentional or not. It communicates what someone values, how they think, and how much effort they are willing to invest. Empaths are highly sensitive to these messages because they understand that actions reveal truth more clearly than words ever can. A person can make endless promises, offer endless explanations, and create endless excuses, but repeated behavior eventually becomes impossible to ignore. This growing awareness creates an internal conflict. The empath still cares. They still want the relationship to succeed. They still remember the good moments and the reasons they stayed for so long. But they are also becoming increasingly aware of the emotional imbalance. They begin noticing how often they are the one making sacrifices. They begin recognizing how frequently they are expected to understand while their own feelings are overlooked. They begin questioning why their kindness is treated as an obligation rather than a gift. Over time, these realizations become impossible to silence. Every unappreciated effort, every broken commitment, every moment of disrespect contributes to a deeper understanding of the relationship's true condition. What once felt like occasional problems now appears as a clear pattern. What once seemed temporary now feels permanent. What once inspired hope now creates doubt. And while the person responsible continues assuming the empath will always remain exactly the same, the empath is quietly transforming into someone who sees the situation with greater clarity, stronger boundaries, and a growing awareness of what they can no longer accept. There comes a moment in the life of every empath that most people never see coming. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. There are no grand announcements, emotional outbursts, or public declarations. In fact, from the outside, everything may appear exactly the same. The empath still smiles. They still communicate. They still fulfill responsibilities and maintain routines. Yet beneath the surface, a powerful transformation has already begun. This is the silent transformation nobody notices until it is too late. It is the moment an empath starts shifting from emotional investment to emotional awareness. It is the moment they stop focusing on what they hope a person will become and start accepting who that person truly is. For a long time, empaths operate from a place of optimism. They see possibilities where others see problems. They see potential where others see limitations. They believe that patience, understanding, and genuine care can help relationships grow stronger. This mindset allows them to endure situations that many people would leave behind much earlier. They continue giving energy, effort, and support because they believe improvement is possible. They believe conversations can lead to change. They believe mistakes can become lessons. They believe love, friendship, and loyalty are worth fighting for. But every empath eventually reaches a point where reality becomes impossible to ignore. Not because they suddenly stop caring, but because they finally see a pattern that can no longer be explained away. The excuses that once sounded reasonable begin to lose their power. The promises that once inspired hope begin to feel repetitive. The same behaviors continue appearing despite endless discussions, endless opportunities, and endless patience. Slowly, the empath begins recognizing that effort alone cannot fix a relationship when only one person is committed to growth. What makes this transformation so difficult to detect is that it happens internally long before it becomes visible externally. Most people expect major changes to announce themselves. They expect warnings. They expect confrontations. They expect obvious signs. But empaths often process their emotions quietly. While everyone else assumes nothing has changed, the empath is having conversations with themselves that nobody else can hear. They are reflecting on past experiences. They are evaluating patterns. They are asking difficult questions about what they deserve and what they are willing to tolerate moving forward. During this stage, something fascinating begins to happen. The empath starts reclaiming emotional energy that was previously invested in others. Instead of constantly focusing on fixing relationships, they begin focusing on understanding themselves. Instead of chasing validation, they begin recognizing their own value. Instead of carrying responsibility for everyone else's happiness, they start acknowledging that every individual is responsible for their own choices. This shift is subtle, but it is incredibly powerful. Many people mistake this transformation for emotional coldness. They notice that the empath is no longer reacting the same way. They notice that endless explanations are no longer being offered. They notice that fewer arguments are taking place. They notice that certain behaviors no longer receive emotional responses. What they fail to understand is that this is not a sign that the empath has stopped caring. It is a sign that the empath has started protecting their peace. They are no longer investing energy into situations that repeatedly produce the same painful results. As awareness grows, the empath begins seeing relationships through a completely different lens. They stop judging people by their intentions and start paying closer attention to actions. They stop focusing on promises and start focusing on consistency. They stop giving unlimited credit for potential and start evaluating present reality. This new perspective changes everything because it removes the illusion that once kept them emotionally attached to unhealthy dynamics. One of the most surprising aspects of this transformation is how calm it often appears. People expect breaking points to look explosive. They imagine anger, confrontation, and emotional chaos. But many empaths reach their strongest moments in complete silence. The emotional storms have already happened internally. The sleepless nights have already occurred. The difficult reflections have already taken place. By the time others notice a difference, the empath has often spent months or even years processing what they need to do. This is why so many people are shocked when an empath finally changes. They assume the relationship is stable because there have been no dramatic confrontations. They assume everything is fine because the empath has remained respectful and composed. They mistake silence for acceptance when, in reality, silence has become a period of deep evaluation. The empath is no longer trying to convince someone to value them. They are no longer exhausting themselves proving their worth. They are no longer sacrificing their well-being in hopes of receiving the respect they have already earned. As this transformation continues, the empath develops stronger boundaries. Not walls designed to keep everyone out, but boundaries designed to protect what matters most. They become more selective about where they invest their time, energy, and emotions. They stop chasing people who repeatedly pull away. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop carrying burdens that were never theirs to carry in the first place. The most important thing to understand is that this transformation is not fueled by resentment. It is fueled by clarity. The empath is not becoming bitter. They are becoming aware. They are learning the difference between helping and enabling. They are learning the difference between patience and self-sacrifice. They are learning the difference between loyalty and emotional imprisonment. With every realization, they become more confident in their ability to choose relationships that reflect mutual respect, mutual effort, and genuine appreciation. And while the people around them continue assuming they have endless patience left to give, the empath is quietly becoming someone who no longer needs to beg for the treatment they deserve. One of the most misunderstood truths about empaths is that people often assume they will always come back. Because empaths are patient, forgiving, and deeply compassionate, many individuals begin to believe that no matter what happens, the empath will eventually return. They assume that every argument will be forgiven, every disappointment will be forgotten, and every separation will be temporary. This belief creates a dangerous sense of security. It convinces people that they can continue taking an empath for granted without facing any real consequences. What they fail to understand is that when an empath truly decides to walk away, that decision is rarely made in a single moment. It is usually the result of a long emotional journey filled with reflection, disappointment, hope, patience, and repeated attempts to save a connection that was slowly falling apart. The reason empaths stay longer than most people is because they genuinely care. They don't abandon people at the first sign of difficulty. They understand that relationships require effort. They understand that human beings are imperfect. They understand that everyone experiences moments of weakness. Because of this understanding, they often spend months or even years trying to repair what others would have already left behind. They communicate, they forgive, they compromise, they adjust. They continue investing energy into people because they believe the relationship can improve. What many people never see are the countless emotional battles the empath fights in private. Before leaving, an empath usually spends a significant amount of time questioning their decision. They revisit memories. They replay conversations. They analyze situations from every possible angle. They wonder whether they are being too sensitive. They wonder whether they should give one more chance. They wonder whether things can still change. This internal struggle often lasts far longer than anyone realizes. While others think the empath is simply staying, the empath is actually evaluating whether staying is still healthy. This is why an empath's departure often surprises people. From the outside, it can appear sudden. One day the empath is there, and the next day they seem emotionally distant or completely gone. But what looks sudden is usually the final stage of a process that began long ago. The emotional separation often happens before the physical separation. Long before the empath leaves, they have already started accepting painful truths. They have already started releasing unrealistic expectations. They have already begun understanding that effort cannot force another person to change. The most important thing to understand is that empaths do not enjoy walking away from people they care about. In fact, it is often one of the most difficult decisions they ever make. Their natural instinct is to help, support, and nurture relationships. Leaving goes against much of what they value. That is why they rarely make the decision lightly. By the time they finally decide to step away, they have usually exhausted every option they could think of. They have tried understanding. They have tried patience. They have tried communication. They have tried forgiveness. And after repeatedly seeing the same patterns continue, they begin realizing that staying is causing more damage than leaving. What makes this moment so powerful is the clarity that comes with it. Once an empath fully accepts reality, something shifts inside them. The confusion begins to disappear. The endless cycle of hope and disappointment comes to an end. The emotional energy that was once invested in fixing the relationship starts returning to them. They begin focusing on their own healing, their own growth, and their own peace of mind. For the first time in a long time, they stop carrying responsibilities that never belonged to them. This shift is often misunderstood by the people left behind. They expect the empath to return because that is what happened in the past. They assume another apology will fix everything. They assume another promise will restore what has been lost. They assume the empath's compassion will override their decision. But they fail to recognize that this is not the same version of the empath they once knew. The person who continually ignored red flags has become someone who trusts their instincts. The person who endlessly waited for change has become someone who values their own well-being. The person who constantly sacrificed themselves for others has become someone who understands the importance of self-respect. When an empath reaches this stage, they are no longer driven by emotion alone. They are guided by experience. Every lesson they learned, every disappointment they endured, and every pattern they observed has contributed to their decision. Their departure is not based on a temporary feeling. It is based on accumulated understanding. It is the result of seeing reality clearly after spending far too long viewing it through the lens of hope. Many people only begin appreciating an empath after they are gone. They suddenly notice the absence of support they once relied on. They notice the silence where encouragement used to exist. They notice the emotional stability that person brought into their life. They realize how often the empath listened without judgment, gave without expecting anything in return, and remained loyal during difficult times. The qualities they once overlooked suddenly become impossible to replace. The tragedy is that by the time this realization arrives, the empath has often moved forward emotionally. They have already spent countless hours processing their pain. They have already grieved the relationship while still inside it. They have already accepted what others are only beginning to understand. While the other person is finally recognizing the value they lost, the empath is discovering the peace that comes from no longer fighting battles they were never meant to fight. Their focus is no longer on returning to what was broken, but on continuing toward a future where their kindness, loyalty, and emotional investment are met with the respect and appreciation they have always deserved. The greatest irony about losing an empath is that many people do not realize what they had until it is gone. While the empath is present, their kindness feels normal. Their support feels expected. Their patience feels endless. Their loyalty feels guaranteed. Day after day, they continue showing up, offering encouragement, listening without judgment, and giving emotional energy even when they receive very little in return. Because these actions become familiar, people stop seeing them as gifts. They begin viewing them as permanent features of the relationship. They assume the empath will always be there tomorrow just because they were there yesterday. And that assumption becomes the beginning of a regret that many never forget. Human nature often causes people to notice what is missing more than what is present. As long as something valuable remains available, it can easily be overlooked. But the moment it disappears, its true importance suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. This is exactly what happens when an empath finally leaves. The emotional support that once felt ordinary is no longer there. The understanding that once made difficult days easier is gone. The person who always tried to see the best in others is no longer standing in the same place, offering the same level of care and commitment. At first, many people believe they can replace what they lost. They assume someone else will provide the same encouragement. They assume another relationship will offer the same emotional depth. They assume another person will show the same level of patience and understanding. But what they quickly discover is that genuine empathy is far rarer than they imagined. It is easy to find people who are present during good times. It is much harder to find people who remain loyal during difficult seasons. It is easy to find people who enjoy receiving support. It is much harder to find people who freely give it without constantly demanding something in return. As time passes, memories begin resurfacing. Small moments that once seemed insignificant suddenly carry new meaning. Conversations that were taken for granted become impossible to forget. Acts of kindness that received little appreciation suddenly appear extraordinary. The person begins remembering all the times the empath stayed patient when they were difficult. They remember the understanding they received after making mistakes. They remember the support that was offered during moments when nobody else was willing to help. What once seemed ordinary now appears incredibly valuable because it is being viewed through the lens of absence. This is where regret becomes powerful. Regret is not simply sadness about losing something. Regret is the painful realization that the loss could have been prevented. It is recognizing that opportunities existed but were ignored. It is understanding that appreciation should have been expressed while there was still time. Many people spend years believing they will eventually have another chance to fix things. They tell themselves there will always be tomorrow. There will always be another conversation. There will always be another opportunity to show gratitude, respect, and effort. But life rarely guarantees those opportunities. The regret becomes even stronger when people recognize that the empath did not leave because of one mistake. They left because of a pattern. They left because of repeated choices. They left because warnings were ignored, effort was unbalanced, and respect slowly disappeared. This realization forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about their own behavior. It requires them to acknowledge that the relationship did not suddenly collapse. It gradually weakened over time while they assumed everything was secure. One of the hardest parts of this regret is understanding that the empath had already been fighting for the relationship long before anyone noticed. While others were comfortable, the empath was carrying emotional burdens. While others were assuming everything was fine, the empath was trying to repair cracks that nobody else seemed interested in fixing. They were giving chances, extending patience, and hoping for change. They were investing energy into preserving a connection that was becoming increasingly one-sided. By the time they finally left, they had already spent countless hours trying to save something that the other person barely realized was in danger. Many people attempt to return once regret arrives. They reach out, they apologize, they promise change, they try to recreate the connection they once had. But often they are surprised to discover that the empath is no longer standing in the same emotional place. The person they took for granted has changed. The experiences that caused the separation have transformed them. The lessons they learned have strengthened their boundaries. The pain they endured has increased their self-awareness. What once would have been enough to bring them back no longer carries the same power. The deepest regret comes from realizing that some opportunities only exist once. Some people enter our lives and bring a level of care, understanding, and loyalty that cannot easily be replaced. When those people are consistently valued, relationships grow stronger. But when those gifts are ignored, dismissed, or exploited, the consequences eventually arrive. Not in the form of revenge, anger, or punishment, but in the form of absence. The seat they once occupied becomes empty. The voice that once offered encouragement becomes silent. The support that once felt guaranteed becomes a memory. And as that realization settles in, people begin understanding a truth they should have recognized from the very beginning: the strongest people are often the kindest. The most valuable relationships are often the easiest to overlook, and the greatest losses in life are rarely recognized while they are still standing right in front of us. As we come to the end of this message, remember one powerful truth. An empath's greatest strength is not their ability to love others. It is their ability to walk away when that love is no longer respected. Too many people mistake kindness for weakness, patience for dependence, and forgiveness for endless tolerance. They assume that the person who keeps understanding, supporting, and giving will always remain. But every empath has a limit. Every act of disrespect leaves a mark. Every broken promise creates distance. Every moment of being taken for granted slowly transforms the way they see the relationship. What makes this transformation so powerful is that it often happens in silence. While others believe everything is fine, the empath is learning, observing, and awakening to their true worth. And once they fully understand their value, they stop chasing people who fail to see it. They stop sacrificing their peace for relationships that drain them. They stop begging for the respect they have already earned. That is why losing an empath often creates a regret that lasts far longer than anyone expects. People eventually realize that genuine loyalty, sincere compassion, and unconditional support are not common qualities. They are rare gifts. The tragedy is that many only recognize their value after they are gone. So whether you are an empath yourself or someone fortunate enough to have one in your life, never underestimate the power of genuine care. Protect the people who stand by you when life becomes difficult. Appreciate those who support you without keeping score. Respect those who choose kindness when they could choose bitterness. Because the day an empath finally closes a chapter, they rarely do so out of anger. They do it out of clarity. And once that clarity arrives, they no longer look back at what they lost. They move forward toward the peace, respect, and appreciation they always deserved.